One of the greatest opening sentences in all of English literature comes from George Orwell's 1984, and it goes like this. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. George Orwell was a master of density, that is, of the ability to reveal vast amounts of information in the most concise and simple sentences. But why is this opening so brilliant? Because the clocks were striking 13. A striking clock is an analog clock, and the clock that strikes 13 must have at least 24 hours on its face. So what, you ask? The mastery of this sentence comes from the fact that it has at least two potential meanings, both of which are correct and both of which are burgeoning with even more information, all in just a handful of carefully crafted words. To understand the first meaning of the clocks were striking 13, we have to go back to English satirist A.P. Herbert's legal work of fiction, Uncommon Law, where he writes, "It is like the 13th stroke of a crazy clock, which not only is self-discredited, but casts a shadow of doubt over all previous assertions." And with this, Orwell establishes in the opening of 1984 that not only is the present uncertain, but that the past, and therefore all of history and time, ambiguous. And then the sentence has yet another meaning. What kind of a society requires a clock with 24 hours on its face? A highly regimented one, a controlled one, organized for production, fascistic, totalitarian. All of this communicated in just a handful of words. But Orwell's use of density is not just confined to terse or concise sentences. He's able to render entire paragraphs dense. The key to density is that it is able to reveal more than the express words themselves. They imply, evoke, convey beyond their obvious meaning. So we already know that the present and the past are dubious, and the regime totalitarian. It even controls thinking. So when most people hear 1984, they think of a dystopian world, full of darkness and despair, but they are only half right. There are moments in 1984 that are full of such concentrated tenderness and beauty that, in my estimation, once read, they leave an indelible impression in the sensitive reader's mind. One of these scenes is the forest scene, where our protagonist, Winston Smith, secretly meets his co-worker Julia from the Ministry of Truth in a society where sex for anything other than child rearing is punishable by death, meeting to risk it all, to make love, to re-establish their humanity. While deep in the forest, all of a sudden, they spot a bird on a branch, a symbol of the freedom that they so desperately yearn for, as well as the enigma of animal instinct. And here is Orwell again, beautifully employing density to let us know much more than the simple, literal words. And so he writes, "Look," whispered Julia. A thrush had alighted on a bough not 5 meters away, almost at the level of their faces. Perhaps it had not seen them. It was in the sun, they in the shade. It spread out its wings, fitted them carefully into place again, ducked its head for a moment as though making a sort of obeisance to the sun, then began to pour forth a torrent of song. In the afternoon hush, the volume of sound was startling. Winston and Julia clung together, fascinated. The music went on and on, minute after minute, with astonishing variations, never once repeating itself, almost as though the bird were deliberately showing off its virtuosity. Sometimes it stopped for a few seconds, spread out and resettled its wings, then swelled its speckled breast and again burst into song. Winston watched it with a sort of vague reverence. For whom? For what was the bird singing? No mate, no rival was watching it. What made it sit at the edge of the lonely wood and pour its music into nothingness? But by degrees, the flood of music drove all speculations out of his mind. It was as though it were a kind of liquid stuff that poured all over him and got mixed up with the sunlight that filtered through the leaves. He stopped thinking and merely felt.